Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm Salvador Cordova, at least the secondary computer. The primary one's not up yet. And I am privileged to have creationist biology student Emery Moyna and Rebecca Davis, who runs the Examining Evolution channel. And I'm going to embarrass her here. She has a t-shirt. It says, "On the Origin of Nonsense."
Was trying to keep it low down so I wouldn't be obnoxious, but yes, this is the shirt I'm wearing today.
On this channel, if something is scientifically or illogical, it's like we're going to be polite, but we can criticize it and we can call things out as nonsense. That includes even anything I say. So I know we want to all be nice and unified, but sometimes we have to give tough love. So Emery, why don't you introduce yourself while I get my primary system up?
Sure. As Sal said, my name is Emery Moyna, graduate student in biology. Well, Lord willing, fingers crossed, 2 semesters to go. See, and as I've said on my channel, I'm a masochist, so I've decided I might want to go for a PhD. Apparently, I hate myself or something like that. But anyway, I have my own YouTube channel, which is not nearly as subscribed as Sal's. That's why I come over here, because Sal gives me an audience. I'm just kidding. I like Sal. But so if you want to come over, have a look at that. I try to get a video up a week. Not always good about that, but that's what I shoot for, is about a video a week. And I talk about nerdy stuff. I'm a little more. When Sal and I do a video, it's like Sal's good cop, I'm bad cop. So, like, if you like Sal's style, you may not necessarily like mine, because I'm a little bit more aggressive than Sal is. But, again, Sal's the nice guy. I've never been claimed to be a nice guy. So, but if you want to check out my channel, it's in his image, and in his image.blog, etc. So if you want to check those things out, feel free.
And Rebecca.
Yeah.
If you could introduce yourself and your channels. By the way, the video description is already at the limit. I'm going to have to drop your, you're going to have to drop your channel URLs to the side chat. Boy, my brain's not working well.
Okay.
So feel free to introduce yourself.
Well, I have a couple of YouTube channels. I have the Bread of Life channel, which is an evangelistic channel sharing the truth about Jesus and doing a lot of interviews and stuff on that. And then I have a channel called Examining Evolution, which just seeks to look at the evidence for and against evolution. And I have a Persian channel, Bread of Life channel in Persian. So those are my YouTube channels. And I will try to get those links and put them in the description. I mean, in the side chat.
Okay. We had some technical issues last night. This is going to be basically something of a redo of the show last night, because it was a 2.5-hour show and my mic, I muted myself for about an hour total.
Oh, wow.
And people were trying to scream at me in the side chat, and I was so focused and having such a good time, I didn't even look at the side chat. And the one time I didn't look was the time I was muted. So, guys, I want to thank you so much for bearing with me. And we're going to try to do this right, because I think it's an important topic. So with that, relating to Rebecca's show on Bread of Life with Dr. Dan, he actually gave what he considered the best evidence for why he's an evolutionist. Anyone here is free to articulate what they think, or if they want to quote Dr. Dan, because this relates to tonight's topic.
I loved having Dr. Dan on that was wonderful. I thought it went well.
Do you remember what he said, what his best evidence for evolution is? I wanted to show a clip of it because it actually echoes my view.
Yeah, it was, I think it had to do with the nested hierarchies and what we would expect and the shared mutations and stuff like that.
The way that I'm getting a
Is that
lot
what he
of,
said?
yeah, I'm getting a lot of other sounds. Can you guys mute
Yep.
yourself? I'm trying to, I don't know who it is. How about Emery, you unmute yourself? Oh, it's coming from you, Emery.
I know what it is. I'll get rid of it.
So Rebecca, you can unmute yourself. I'll tell you what
Okay.
he said. We have like common DNA, a translation system,
Yeah.
ribosome. We
Mhm.
basically have a lot of things in common, and that's why we have common descent. That's actually a very powerful argument, and there's subtleties to this that are significant enough that even creationists have. There have been creationists that actually they go off to university or medical school, like Michael Denton,
Mhm.
and they start to study the similarity, and then they leave creationism or the faith entirely. That's what happened to Denton. So
But he came back, right?
he came back kind of halfway in between. I don't believe he's a Christian. He still accepts
Oh.
common descent. I don't even know that he likes to identify himself as an ID proponent, although he's very sympathetic. So, so let me share about Dr. Sanford. At age 39, he had been an atheist. He and his wife started going to church because they felt they needed something more than what they could do to just solve ordinary human problems. He was a successful research professor at Cornell. I mean, at an Ivy League school, and to be a research professor, you don't even need to teach classes. They just hired you because they want a scientist. I mean, that's great. They don't even recruit you to teach classes to draw revenues for the university. So he invented the gene gun. It's in the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. A large fraction of the genetically improved organisms on the planet are through his gene gun. And he and his wife said, well, you know, there are more things to life than you and I could fix. Why don't we go to church? And so this atheist who lost his faith in high school he actually lost his faith in high school because of evolutionary theory. He was starting to become a Christian, and he told his mother and father one day that he's no longer a believer. Evolutionary theory had a lot to do with that. I have a video, I have an audio clip of the interview, and at age 39 they go back to church. He and his wife profess the Christian faith, they get baptized, and that was his journey. So he was a theistic evolutionist for some time. He read someone said, hey, do you know about Michael Behe? He read Michael Behe's book, and because he's a biologist and a Christian, he was open. He said, wow, I didn't know that. He said, I didn't even know that there was any other viewpoint, because he thought evolution was God's truth. And then someone else, he transferred churches, and somewhere along the way someone said, hey, there's creationism, there's old earth creationism. So he became an old earth creationist. So he went from theistic evolutionist to old earth creationist. And then he found another viewpoint. He said, I didn't even know there was another viewpoint called young earth creationism. So by age 49, he was a young earth creationist. So the journey took 10 years from age 39 to age 49 to go from atheist to young earth creationist. And that's one reason that I'm very patient also with people who are theistic evolutionists and they're new Christians, or they're old earth creationists, because both Dr. Sanford and I were there for a very, very long time. I'm not into going out and calling people heretics if they're struggling with these issues and they have scientific grounds. I might go a little farther if they are appealing to ancient pagan texts to interpret the Bible to make it old earth or whatever, I that's where I do draw the line. But on scientific grounds, if someone tells me that they're believing that the universe is old and in common descent, I'll be very sympathetic, especially if they're science. If they're science students, I'll especially be patient with them. A good example is someone who's technically a theistic evolutionist, but is called a creationist, is Michael Behe. He accepts universal common ancestry, but he insists on intelligent design. And so this is kind of the funny thing. He's called a creationist by the evolutionist, and the many creationists will call him a theistic evolutionist. Not many creationists, but some. And so what happened in 2016 at a conference, Dr. Sanford told the conference, he said, if there's anything that would make me go back to evolutionism or to be an evolutionist, he said it would be the ALU elements. The ALU elements, and we're going to describe that tonight. So guys, if you have any thoughts while I queue up some things to read, feel free to speak your mind.
I'm just going to quibble a little tiny bit with what you said, Sal, and it's a very small thing. I think most creationists are capable of making the distinction between a theistic evolutionist and a ID proponent. The people who don't tend to be able to make that distinction are the evolutionists themselves. They just assume anybody who doesn't agree with them 100% on evolution is a creationist. So I think even most, maybe the old Earth creationists might struggle to distinguish between a theistic evolutionist and an ID proponent, but I really honestly don't think any of them would even struggle that much with it. I think most people can understand that ID and theistic evolution are not friends. They're on opposite sides of the fence. They don't really like each other very much. So that's just that's very minor. I just thought I'd point that out, though. You're muted, Sal.
Thank you. See, that's why I need you. I had a total of 1 hour. 40% of my show is muted, and I didn't see. That's why I need you guys. We actually have a technical question here. Can you explain how epigenetic marks are set up for different cell types during development? Short answer, two short answers. One, that's the subject of another show. But in brief, I asked my professor at the NIH how this exactly happens. I mean, we know it's related. We know it's connected, okay? Because the chromatin modifications do affect transcription. But I said, what controls the marking? So we know that the marks have influence, but what controls the marking? He said, no one knows. It's that complex. So I think if I could explain it, I'd get the Nobel Prize, because there's still a lot in biology.
No, you wouldn't, Sal. You're a creationist. They aren't allowed to get the Nobel Prize.
Oh, that's right. That's right. But God knows. Nope. Out of my specialty. Thank you. I don't even know it. Never heard of that. So tonight's topic is Ayala, Flipons Flipoff Ayala. So I'm going back to topic. I'm sorry to have well, greetings, John. But I have to stick to the topic I had promised the audience, which is ALU elements, and that's the topic of tonight. However, that will briefly touch not on epigenetics, but epitranscriptomics, which is very similar. We will touch on some chromatin modifications toward the end, but we're not going to overwhelm Rebecca here, because I promised.
I'm already there, Sal. I'm already there.
I promised her the first 10 to 30 minutes would be kind of toned down to reach the most accessible audience. So those are great questions.
Okay. And I had forgotten that Dr. Dan that his main thing that he said was about the shared DNA. But I mean, I guess the argument the response that I always hear to that is, well, why would like God need or want to remake like DNA in a different way? Like, why wouldn't he use the same? So
Okay.
what's wrong with that argument? I mean, I just,
Okay. No, this is exactly why I wanted you on here.
yeah,
Is because both you and John Maddox and other creationists are like, I don't have a problem with it. And I'm trying to say,
right.
okay, if you want to minister to people that are on the fence, you have to understand their mindset. And I'm saying it's not necessarily just a spiritual blindness or anything. These are legitimate things that even a creationist of the caliber of John Sanford was really struggling with. He said before all of us, if anything would make me go back to being an evolutionist, it's the ALU elements. And it is that similarity argument. We have these stretches of DNA called ALUs in chimpanzees and in humans. And he came on James Tour's channel, and James Tour asked, well, why do you believe what you believe? He said, well, I decided to subject all of my beliefs to the Bible. And by that, he means a literal interpretation of like Genesis. So he felt that that is his moral obligation. And so even if the data don't look promising, he said he's going to preach his viewpoint. To that end, and I didn't, I'll now complete a little bit, I'll add a little bit more to the story. After that meeting, he said, Sal, I want you to look into ALU elements, find out how to solve this problem. And I'm just like, Dr. Sanford, I'm an engineer, I'm a finance guy, I'm not a biologist. So that's why I wanted especially to have you here to acquaint you with the struggle.
Okay.
And I'm going to bring up some stuff right now, and I'm just going to show you some. I'm just going to do a little bit of gene browsing so we could show this. So
Okay.
So Emery, before I do that, I'm going to pass something into the, see if I could put it in the side chat. It's a link, and maybe we could do a reading. I'm just giving you a heads up what might be read.
Okay. I didn't recognize that blog.
Oh yeah, why evolution is true.
Yeah. Jerry Coyne.
So okay, so now let's do. I'm gonna just show you what what a biology student who's a creationist will see. So let me see.
And I'm kind of curious because Emory is a biology student. So Emory, do you like feel that this thing that we're looking at is a difficult issue?
For me, no. But that is because I have not, to be honest with you, had enough time to delve into it far enough to make a decision on it one way or the other. Most of my biology doesn't get into the sequence data so much. But oh brother. But I do look at it a little bit. I don't spend as much time with it as I'd like. Sorry, we had a troll show up I just got rid of.
Oh, okay.
So apparently they're out in force again tonight. So
Yeah, thank you. I will say, okay, I came from a theistic evolution background myself, so that's why I don't know. Honestly, I don't know what's easier, to start off as a theistic evolutionist and then become a young Earth creationist, or start off as a young Earth creationist. I will say that I've met a lot of young Earth creationists who used to be atheists or theistic evolutionists. I have met a lot of atheists and theistic evolutionists who used to be young Earth creationists. So I especially think young Earth creationists are vulnerable,
Mm.
and they don't like me. Let me just temporarily.
You mean when they start out as young Earth creationists?
Yes, they're
and then
vulnerable,
they-
and yeah, and they're. That's why I wanted to have. That's why I'm really grateful the two of you are on my the first installment of my series, Teaching Young Earth Creationism Responsibly. And the main reason for that is that, and the young Earth creationists don't like me saying this, we don't have victory on this like we do with, say, the origin of life. So what do I mean by victory? Look at how the way James Tour just crushed Dave Farina. That's what I call victory. That was a pummeling of the other side of abiogenesis. When the other side, when the naturalistic, atheistic side has to invoke multiple universes that we can't see or test to explain the origin of life, and that's becoming fashionable in the scientific community, is appealing to things they can't even see, even in principle, that they can't test or verify. I said, we've won that argument. We're not at that stage with the age of the fossil record for sure, the solar system, the Earth, and definitely not the age of the universe. I mean, so James Tour is a mainstream scientist. In his debate with Farina, his internet exchange, he used just textbook stuff. He didn't have to appeal to no metaphysical arguments, no theological arguments, straight from the chemistry textbooks. He said, this is a lecture I could give in any university before all the faculty. We're not at that stage with young Earth creationism. And I think that's why a lot of people will fall away, because they're told one thing, that this is so obvious, and then they go to school and it's not. And so,
well,
please go on.
I want to just interject here. It is blatantly obvious from Scripture. I want to distinguish here. It is blatantly obvious from Scripture that the Earth is young. And I think, I don't necessarily say that it is as obvious from science. I think we can get there, but I don't think we're not in as strong a position on the scientific evidence front as we are on the scriptural evidence front.
Praise the Lord. You summarized it very well. And so how did I deal with this? I said, well, this is like 10 years ago. I said, well, maybe the copies of the Bible we have are wrong, or maybe the Bible's mostly right. I mean, I'm just leveling with you. I said, design is apparent. Our need of a savior is apparent. The world's a miserable place. I get that. I believe there's a creator. The archaeological evidence says Jesus rose from the dead. There's a good chance. There's miracles in my life, answered prayers. But I said, this is really hard. And this is where a lot of people honestly are, who might be sitting in the pews. They're not, that's where I was. I said, Lord, I'm not trying to be a compromiser. I'm just so confused. I know that I need you. I'm not an atheist. I'm calling out on the name of the Lord every day, but I don't know how to deal with this. And I've told people, I think if I were born 100 years ago, I probably would be an atheist. That's kind of scary. That I happen to be born in an era that someone of my temperament could find faith, because I'm extremely skeptical. So that's where I'm at. But then I started to get evidence to help me. And that's actually, it's when I went to grad school at Johns Hopkins to study physics, I realized, oh my, I thought young Earth creationism was outrageous till I saw the current cosmological models on the Big Bang. And I'm like, okay, everything's a level playing field. They'll say in the popular press and the guys hustling for grant, they'll give you one story. But then when you're among the graduate students, professors, you'll get another. In fact, I shared this book by my professor of supplementary quantum mechanics. And he talked about how his doubts about the Big Bang, even though he mostly endorsed it. And he also had a chapter on the 5 reasons galaxies can't exist, but they do. And of course, I'm all ears when I hear that. So tonight, I wanted to share kind of, this was a big deal that we got the ALU elements solved, or at least got enough data, because that's one stretch of the DNA that the evolutionists have been pounding us on. So, and when I try to tell creationists, it's like, okay, you may believe the Bible and you read it literally, but then you have guys like me in the pew that are just really struggling and not knowing what to do, because it happens to be in our field of specialty that young earth creationism touches, like physics. And certainly if you're a biology student, you're going to see stuff. And so I'm trying to give a little bit, at least give you some resources today for any of the creationists out there, and also for you, to deal with this in a way that's not dismissive, a way that's compassionate, in a way that we would deal with, say, a Dr. Sanford, who is a Cornell professor, biologist, evolutionist at some time, and then he's looking at this data and he said, I don't know what to do, but I'm trusting you, God. And that was a great example there, Emery, because I don't think I would have gone that far. And so he was just stepping out in faith. He said, Sal, go ahead and try to solve this problem for me, will you? Okay, so what is the problem? And while I get this set up, if you all have any comments.
Well, first of all, I just love the fact that that Dr. Sanford basically said, Sal, I've got a problem. Fix it for me. The Sal is the fixer for Dr. Sanford, apparently. We'll go with that. No, I think what you're saying is pretty on point. I mean, I'm a little bit more convinced. I think that there's strong scientific evidence for a young Earth than you are, Sal. But we operate in different fields, and we operate in different, with different mindsets too, to a certain extent. So
we have different temperaments too.
That's true. That's true.
I'm a doubting Thomas by nature. I mean, just the way I am.
Yeah, I mean, I'm honestly a pretty cynical and skeptical person to start as well. But I mean, you watch my videos, I'm cynical. Rebecca, I'm sorry. I'm making jokes that Sal and I know what we're talking about. And you have no
I couldn't have picked 2 more polar opposites in temperament. Okay,
Really?
Rebecca's like the sweetest. Oh, let's get along together. And Emery's just like, oh goodness. Okay, go on.
No,
Emery.
I don't do the nice guy thing. But anyway, but anyway, so the point I was driving at is, I do recognize that there are areas, and part of this is we just don't have the manpower. Like, there are issues within the creationist community that we need answers to. I'm no problem saying that. But, when you're operating with probably a community of under 100 active researchers, you only can do so much.
Yeah.
And
we're
no
like Gideon's army. Go on.
I was going to say, we don't get government grants to study this, right? If we need millions of dollars, we've got to crowdfund it. Like we just can't just go to the Fed and say, hey, we're doing this particular project. Even if it's a project that's not explicitly related to young Earth creations, like, we want to confirm the radiometric dating actually works the way it's supposed to work. Do we? Nope, we don't get money for that either. We have to crowdfund it. So, and the researchers who are in this field, there's not that many of them. So, even let's just say, and I'm not going to name anybody because I don't want to, because this is a hypothetical scenario, but let's say that, I don't know, physicist X is wrong about something related to cosmology. I don't know, maybe anything you want, because I'm outside of cosmology, so I'm going to a field that's not my expertise. And that particular person happens to be a young Earth creationist and, writes proficiently. That idea could proliferate easily because there's only like 3 people who could actually realize that, wait a minute, there's a problem here, problem here, problem here. So it makes it very hard because we have such a small community of skilled researchers to A, to say that say if somebody comes with a new idea, if it's a good idea or not, and B, to solve major problems. Because like just the radiometric dating question, when they worked on that, it was like 6 or 8 people, and it took them years to do that. And 6 or 8 people out of a couple of 100,000 research professors in the United States is nothing. 3 to 6 people, like 4, I think it was 5 or 6 people. I don't remember exactly how many it was. Out of 100 people, that's a lot. So, and even so, you know, and it took them a couple of years where they weren't working on anything else. They just worked on that.
That was a big creationist project.
Right, exactly.
The rate, he's referring to the rate group, and they want to do it again. And the joke is what are they going to call it? The second rate group.
Oh boy.
So Rebecca, if you have any thoughts, then I'm going to go to some live shots of what a graduate student would look at as far as genome comparison.
I'm just waiting to hear the solution to the issue you're talking about. So
okay,
yeah, I'm ready.
So let me just bring this up, and Emery, this is for you also. Speaking of you, because we're talking about created kinds in proteins.
Ah, yes, yes.
And so, Rebecca, I'm just going to explain what I'm doing here. I'm going to show a human protein and show how similar it is to a chimpanzee protein. Anyone can do this. They can go to the UniProt database like that, and they can enter the search terms like I did in the search box. And then they could just kind of click around, and there's this option called BLAST for basic local alignment tool. So and I'll click it and I will run it, and it's going to take about 2 minutes for it to grind through. So in the meantime, I'm just going to put us back. I know so many people who started down the road calling parts of the Bible metaphorical. They are mostly non-believers now. It's a scary path that I really don't want to start down. I'm with you there. Now, the thing that I had going from me, I was going from the opposite path, okay? I was a theistic evolutionist first. And I think we keep hearing about deconstructions. You know, one way that parents and churches protect people from being deconstructed is not exposing them to the other ideas. But I was raised in the other camp, and so there really wasn't a deconstruction that went on. I was already there, and it was a matter of construction. And so we have better tools now to kind of do a construction. So there is an exchange on the net. I'm not going to give specifics. We're just even talking about the ages of the patriarchs, and I had a show on that. I said, okay, you can accept this literally or not. I pointed out that if you make it figurative and say you just have to scale down the ages, you'd end up having 4-year-old kids having to be fathers at 4 years old. So you either accept it literally or I mean, like John Walton, I'll give that name. That's all allegorical. I'm just like, okay, so you're taking ancient texts and using pagan texts to interpret the Bible. You still come up with an absurdity. Now you've come up with something even more absurd, saying 4-year-old kids are
having their own kids.
Yeah. I said, okay, why don't we look at now the genetic data that suggests that our genomes is deteriorated? Doesn't that make a lot more sense now? You don't need to appeal to pagan texts at all. So that's one example. So this thing is, okay, it's finished grinding away. It takes a while for this computation to happen. So what I did was I what I did was I took a human protein, and it's called cytochrome C oxidase subunit number 1. And I have listings of creatures that are similar, that have have that same protein in the level of similarity. So it starts off with 100% because that's the human. If we compare humans to humans, it's 100%. Human to chimp is 98.8. Humans to another kind of chimp, the Paniscus, 98.4%. The gorilla, 98.1, and so on and so forth. So now, let me just, there should be a column here that says view alignment. Let me see if I could bring that up. And I'll just show this. See if it says here. So this is the spelling right here of the human protein of the cytochrome C oxidase subunit 1. And we'll look at it, what it looks like in the chimpanzee. Let's see if it's still running.
It's still running. Yeah, it says it's going to take about 3 minutes. So.
Oh, that's obnoxious. But I think it's really powerful when you actually just see. Oh, there it is.
That took a lot less time than it said it was going to. Yay.
I know that the font is really small and it might be blurry, but on the top row here, you have the human, and then on the next row is the chimpanzee. And you can just, when you look at this, it starts to hit you. Oh my goodness, we're so similar. And what do you do? So, and this is going to be kind of the basis of tonight's talk. So what I've tried to say is, okay, and what Dr. Dan was saying is this similarity is very powerful. So when we do paternity tests, is everyone still online? Hello?
Yep, I'm still here.
Okay. Rebecca looks like she's frozen. Oh, well.
No. Am I frozen?
Okay.
No, you're good. You're good.
Your audio
No,
is
I
working.
was just muted. Yeah.
Okay. So what I said is, like in the Maury show, the way they establish paternity is similarity of DNA, particularly what they call shared errors. Specifically, the term is short tandem repeats, STRs. And I did want to show a clip from the Maury show where I wasn't able to put it on, where the couple has a one-night stand, and then the girl comes back a year later and she's saying, "You're the daddy," and he's saying, "No, I'm not," and she'll say, "Yes, you are." And this plays out. This show has made a lot of money, gets a lot of audience, and at the end of the show, Maury said, "Okay, let's find out." And he'll either say, "You are the father," or "You're not the father," and there's all this drama. In the way they establish it is similarity, but particularly shared errors. So how do we solve this if we're young earth creationists? I've tried to tell people, the creationists, try not to use genetic arguments. You're going to get slaughtered if you're going to try to argue against similarity. I just showed this here, and they're going to keep throwing that in your face, guys. The way you fight universal common ancestry is with young earth, young fossil record, young solar system, young cosmos arguments. If you can establish that the fossil record is young, or that human life is young, even the evolutionists, we had it right here on this channel, Dapper Dino, who is no longer a young earth creationist. I said, okay, there wouldn't be common ancestry. Would you agree? If we could show collectively that life is young, or the fossil record is young, it's common design, not common descent, that accounts for the similarity. We don't, what is not a good argument, and I tried to illustrate this last night in my botched video, it would be like when Maury says, "You are the father," and then if he said, "Oh, the similarity is due to common design," it just wouldn't fly. He'll have that, he'll have to come to terms that he's the dad. He has to take care of the kid. That's really the purpose of the show, is to get the fathers to be more responsible. But that's what it sounds like to my ears. It's like you're just coming up with something to deny the fact that there's common ancestry. That's what it sounds like to us. So this is why I've tried to separate. When Dr. Dan last night said, this is what convinces me of evolution, what I would have said is, Dr. Dan, are you fine with saying that the theory common descent is separate from the evolution of complexity? Because that's what Michael Behe does. So he might say there's common descent for the reasons that I was just showing and for the reasons Dr. Dan, but then he'll say, what do you do with topoisomerase or the bacterial flagellum? It's a subtle difference. And what the ID community has been saying, because we have a lot of old earth creationists and old earth evolutionists like Michael Behe, they'll say it's a non sequitur to say that common descent necessarily implies the complexity will arise. That's a very subtle, important distinction. So if I were debating Dr. Dan on some topics, I'll say, okay, if we're not talking about the age of the fossil record or Earth, let's assume common ancestry for the sake of argument. But if you're going to assume the Earth is young, it's not common descent, it's common design. Rebecca, do you have some thoughts? Does that help in you dealing with people like, let's say you ran across a younger version of Salvador Cordova who's struggling with his faith? Does that help give you some insights of where I was 20 years ago? Because you might run into people like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess, again, me just seeing that lineup that you showed, still for me, it doesn't move me. But I'm hearing what you're saying, that for people like you, it's going to affect them, and people who already believe strongly in evolution, then that's going to be good evidence for them. So what would my response be?
Well, you can refer them to our channel, or we could do shows on this. No, I mean, I gotta point something out. We're much more empathetic with people that have, if I've gone through it, I'm more empathetic to them. And
right.
And just like the best example I could give, I mean, sadly, if there have been girls that have had issues, I'd be the last. I would not try to counsel them for a number of reasons, but one of them being, I don't understand quite. I would say, I'd say, hang on, let me make some calls. Let me ask to see if there's someone who's been through your situation, who's gotten through it. Can I refer you to them? Like Jennifer Greenberg is one person that, there's been some issues with abuse in the church, a very sensitive matter, you know what I mean? And I wouldn't know how to deal with it, but I know someone that can refer. So just knowing that sensitivity is needed is a start. And then knowing that there are people out there, I think maybe that's the way, because there's no way that even if Jennifer Greenberg taught me everything about how to deal with, how she deals with it, it's not the same as if there's someone who's gone through it already. And
right. But now you said that you have the answer to this. Dr. Sanford sent you off to find the answer to this, and you found the answer to this. So what's the answer?
Okay. So first we have to understand the problem. I set up the problem just showing the similarity. And so what John Maddox will say, oh, it's identical because it's similar function. And I said, well, okay, that might fly. Definitely if we had the young Earth. What about shared errors? What if there are mistakes? Why would God make two mistakes in the chimpanzee and the human simultaneously? That's really powerful. I don't know if that resonates with you, why that would look really funny.
Yeah, that to me is a good argument. That's a good argument. Yeah.
Okay. So shared errors is okay. Thank you. All right, now you get it, because I've had a hard time getting that far. Okay,
Yeah,
so
I mean, the similarities don't surprise me, but the shared errors, that is it's the father moment.
yes, exactly.
Yeah,
You
he's
are the
father.
father. Because he said, it would just sound really funny. It's like, well, God created the same mistake in the kid as in me, and we're not
Right.
related. Okay, so it's really
Right.
powerful. So with that, enter Emery. He's going to do a reading, and I'm going to put it up on the screen myself. So let me introduce who this article is by. It is by Francisco Ayala. He is a ex-Catholic priest, evolutionary biologist. Catholic priests in monasteries are very good at making wine and growing grapes. When he left the priesthood, he became a winemaker, wine producer, became filthy rich. He became a professor of evolutionary biology at a secular school. He donated $10 million, and then they kicked him out because they accused him of sexual harassment. Ex-Catholic priest accused of sexual. I shouldn't laugh, but they have scrubbed a lot of his stuff from the net, and that's why I was very lucky to find this example. And it would be just like me to lose the link I just gave to Emery.
Oh, do you want me to put that back for you, Sal?
Hang on, I think I could find it. Ayala. Okay, here, I got it.
All
So
right.
he's going to describe, okay, this is the argument. So I'm going to acquaint you with the argument that Dr. Sanford would hear, and then I'll give you the solution, because I want the audience to get a feel of just how powerful it sounds at first, and you think that there's no counter. And so I'm kind of setting up the drama. So Rebecca, I know you don't like my long-winded talks, and this is just the way I am. And so Rebecca's gotten me to make much more succinct and more dramatic stuff. So when our presentations are together, they're a little bit more exciting. They don't put people to sleep. So,
Yeah, my husband says the same thing, Sal. He likes, to do his long explanations too, and I'm like always trying to speed him up. So, yes, I need you to get to the point.
So, okay, I found it, and now let me put it on the screen. And then, this is why it's so good to have shows like this, because where I have people to help me run the show. Okay, Emery, go ahead, and I'm going to put this on the screen.
Okay, so it is making sure that we had the same thing. Do you want me to read the commentary from Cobb, or do you want me to start with reading Ayala's comments?
Oh, go ahead and read the whole thing.
Okay.
This will set it up.
Just as a little explanation, this was posted on Jerry Coyne's blog, Why Evolution is True, which is taken from the title of his book by the same name, which there's a lot of problems with that book. I'm eventually going to do a full review of it, but that's neither here nor there. So here's the starting posted by somebody else. Jerry, on his way to the Galapagos, asked me to post this. Over at BioLogos, Science and the Sacred has persuaded Francisco Ayala to write a review of Stephen C. Meyer's Signature in the Cell. Here it is. There's a debate going on over there, too. Now, this is Ayala. How should a person of faith respond to Signature in the Cell? I'm an evolutionary scientist who would suggest the following considerations. The keystone argument of Signature of the Cell is that chance by itself cannot account for the genetic information found in the genomes of organisms. I agree. And so does every evolutionary scientist, I presume. Why then spend chapter after chapter and hundreds of pages of elegant prose to argue the point? It is as if in a book about New York, the author would tell us that New York is not in Europe, then dedicate most of the book to advancing evidence that indeed, truly, New York is not in Europe. Signature in the Cell, he can't even title it right. Good, it's Signature in the Cell, not of the Cell. Signature in the Cell offers intelligent design, ID, as the alternative explanation to chance in order to account for genetic information. This suggestion turns out to be no more convincing than a proposal by the author of the book about New York, who, having exhausted all possible ways of telling us that New York is not in Europe, would now offer Peoria as the alternative city to visit. We would rather read about New York's architecture, splendid avenues, and great parks, of the rich culture and ethnic diversity of the city, about its restaurants, concert venues, theaters, wonderful sights in and around the city. But regarding natural selection, genetics, ecology, development, physiology, and behavior in the evolution of genetic information, there is nothing substantive in the signature of the cell. Christians and other people of faith should be troubled about signature of the cell for several... It's driving me nuts. He didn't title it right. I'm sorry. Anyway, one is that Meyer avoids consideration of the negative implications of ID as an explanation of the origin of genetic information, which is his main subject. According to Meyer, ID provides a more satisfactory explanation of the human genome than evolution does. ID's explanations envision, quote, discrete or discontinuous intelligent activity in the history of life. Scientists have now obtained the complete DNA sequence of the human genome. The genome has a length of about 3 billion nucleotides, the quote, letters of the DNA alphabet. Scientists have also obtained the completed DNA sequence of the chimpanzee genome, also 3 billion letters long, and of several hundred other species of organisms. How can we envision the, quote, discrete or discontinuous activity, unquote, of the intelligent designer? The human and chimpanzee genomes differ from one another in just a few percent of the DNA letters, less than 2% in the genes that code for proteins. It turns out that's not true, but they didn't know that at the time. Did the designer tweak the chimpanzee genome to make the human genome? Or perhaps more likely, did the designer use a pre-existing genome and tweak it a bit to make the human genome and tweak it a different way to make the chimpanzee genome? Did the designer go on tweaking genomes a bit at a time to design the genome of the gorilla and other primates and more tweaking for other animals, all the way down to mice and even to fruit flies, with which we share a good fraction of the genome? The human genome includes about 25,000 genes and lots of other, mostly short switch sequences, which turn on and off genes in different tissues and at different times and play other functional roles. There are also lots and lots of DNA sequences that are nonsensical. For example, there are about 1 million virtually identical ALU or ALU sequences that are each 300 letters, nucleotides long, and are spread throughout the human genome. Think about it. There are in the human genome about 25,000 genes, but 1 million interspersed ALU sequences. 40 times more ALU sequences than genes. It is as if the editor of signature of the cell would have inserted between every 2 pages of Meyer's book 40 additional pages, each containing the same 300 letters. Likely, Meyer would not think of his editor as being intelligent. Would a function ever be found for these 1 million nearly identical ALU sequences? It seems most unlikely. In fact, we know how these sequences come about. One new ALU sequence appears in the genome for every 10 newborns, generation after generation. The designer at work? Unlikely. Many of these sequences damage the genome, causing abortion of the fetus during the early weeks of life. Oh, you acknowledge that it's alive! Anyway, sorry. Perhaps one could attribute the obnoxious presence of the ALU sequences to the degenerative biological processes that are not the result of ID. But was the designer incompetent or malevolent in not avoiding the eventuality of this degeneration? Come to think of it, why is it that most species become extinct? More than 2 million species of organisms now live on Earth. Side note, that number is more like 8 million now. But the fossil record shows that more than 99% of all species that ever lived became extinct. That is more than 1 billion extinct species. How come? Is this dreadful waste an outcome intended by the designer? Or is extinction an outcome of degeneration of genetic information and biological processes? If so, was the designer not intelligent enough or benevolent enough to avoid the enormity of this waste? Meyer asserts that the theory of intelligent design has religious implications. Those who believe in a transcendent God may therefore find support for their belief from the biological evidence that supports the theory of intelligent design. I do think that people of faith may find in the world many reasons that support their belief in God, but I don't think that intelligent design is one of them. Quite the contrary. Indeed, there are good reasons to reject ID on religious grounds in addition to scientific grounds. The biological information encased in the genome determines the traits that developing organisms will have in humans as well as other organisms. But humans are chock full of design defects. We have a jaw that is not sufficiently large to accommodate all our teeth, so that wisdom teeth have to be removed and other teeth straightened by an orthodontist. Our backbone is less than well designed for our bipedal gait, resulting in back pain and other problems in late life. The birth canal is too narrow for the head of the newborn to pass easily through it, so that millions of innocent babies and their mothers have died in childbirth throughout human history. I could go on about human features that betray a design that is certainly not intelligent. I will add only one more consideration. More than 20% of all human pregnancies end in spontaneous abortion during the first 2 months of pregnancy. This is because the human genome, the human reproductive system, is so poorly designed. Do I want to attribute this egregiously defective design to God, to the omnipotent and benevolent God of the Christian faith? No, I don't. It would not do to say that God designed intelligently the human genome and that it then decayed owing to natural processes. If God would have designed the human genome, surely he would have done it so that this enormous misfortune would not happen. Think of it, 20% of all human pregnancies amount to 20 million abortions every year. I shudder at the thought of this calamity being attributed to God's specific design of the human genome. To me, this attribution would amount to blasphemy. Before the scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and the like were attributed to the direct action of God, so that tsunamis that 5 years ago killed 250,000 Sumatrans might have been interpreted as God's punishment. Now we know that these catastrophes are the result of natural processes. Similarly, people of faith would do better to attribute the mishaps caused by defective genomes to the vagaries of natural selection or other processes of evolution rather than to God's design. Now, I want to point out before Sal comments that these comments are over 10 years old at this point and quite a bit out of date. But anyway, go ahead.
Rebecca, your thoughts?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know why people think they can. People who cannot design anything like the human body think that they can critique how God created the human body. So all of his little, the birth canal too narrow, all these different things, just to me, it's what my husband calls 1-star Amazon review on God's creation, on God's performance. But I'm not persuaded by any of that. What do you think?
Go on, Emery, your thoughts.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to jump in. I can see his argument, and I think it's a very good argument against ID. But
really?
I actually do.
Yeah.
I actually do but not against young Earth creationism, because a lot of his questions are, why did God do this? Why did God do that? Type questions, which can be explained by a young Earth creationist according to through the fall and the curse that has come on creation. But ID can't explain those things because ID doesn't postulate a particular deity question. But I do understand his argument. I actually think that there are his arguments regarding similarity are more compelling to me than, well, God wouldn't do it this way arguments. Because the God wouldn't do it this way arguments, well, you're not God, so you don't get to decide how he does things, A. And B, those arguments are dealt with in a young Earth context much better than you could ever deal with them from an ID perspective. And again, this has been my ongoing, ever-present critique of ID. ID is a great idea, but because they won't go to the Christian God, they won't go and say, this is who the intelligent designer is. Now, a lot of them believe in the Christian God. I'm not saying they don't. I'm not attacking someone like Stephen Meyer's Christianity. That's not what I'm doing here. But because they philosophically have made that decision that, hey, we're just going to say they're the designer and you can pick who the designer is, they're vulnerable to, well, the designer wouldn't do it this way type things. Anyway, go ahead, Sal. Sorry.
Yeah, and Rebecca, this is really good because I wasn't so much putting this forward to persuade you, but I want to let you know a lot of Christians on the fence, like I was 20 years, this probably almost put them over the edge of the cliff. I mean, it's hard to convey how this can really hurt someone hard. And Darwin lost his daughter before she was age 10. This would resonate with someone like that, and you could see the damage he's done. He wrote The Origin of Nonsense because of that. What I've often said, this is not a formal definition of the difference between ID and creationism. If you're a creationist, you already believe in intelligent design. But if you're an ID guy, it doesn't necessarily mean you believe in creationism. So one way to look at it is ID says the world is designed. Creationism and even I would include some forms of old earth creationism. Creationism says the world is intelligently designed, but also cursed and in need of a savior.
Yeah.
And so all these problems he was listing, it's like, well, him being a Catholic priest, this is really almost inexcusable that he wouldn't provide the answer, because I grew up in a Catholic church, and I was taught original sin, and as a kid I couldn't understand that, and I still don't quite understand all the details, but the essentials are that our first parents sinned, and that sin has brought death and misery and suffering into the world, and it is reminders we're in need of salvation. And so even Ayala could have made the argument for me, but he was really trying to trash ID so badly that you know, he wouldn't state the obvious that most Christians are aware of, and I thought that was kind of slimy personally on his part.
I mean, Sal, the guy is credibly accused of sexual harassment. Do you really expect him to be upright and honest in his critiques?
Yeah, ex-Catholic priest. Okay, no, that was so. But the point is, you know, we tend to, you know, I'm learning some lessons in empathy, is that we tend to view other people like ourselves, and that if it's not a problem for us, it must not be a problem for them. And I'm having to be a lot more sensitive to that now as I'm trying to reach students and try to understand what makes them tick and what hangs them up. So if anything, I hope this was of value to you, Rebecca, that you could at least kind of see that this is a very hurtful essay. And the reason I shared it is this is what almost Dr. Sanford himself said this would have put him over the top. And he was a creationist at this time. Already had been a creationist for about 10 years. And he said, still, this one is still sticking in his gut. So this was 2010 that this article was written. 2016, Dr. Sanford comes out to the group and said, this is still a problem. And he said, I don't have an answer. And after the conference, he said, Sal, you work on that. Now,
again, Sal's the fixer. Sal's the fixer.
But Sal is not. I give glory to God.
That's true.
Because the problem was solved. Right when Ayala was writing this, there were developments in the laboratory. And I told Dr. Sanford, you know, it's really provident you hired me when you did. Because if you hired me, like, say, 3-5 years earlier, I'd have been totally worthless. But you hired me at the time when all of your questions that are major, the secular world started to provide answers for. And even to this day, even like in Dr. Dan's talk last night, he was talking to he said, oh, look at the transposable elements, the TEs. And I wanted, you know, I wasn't going to scream. I said, I know that's probably what he'll say, because in his debate with me, he cited it. And what are ALUs? ALUs are one class of transposable elements. So Dr. Dan, God bless him, and I mean that sincerely, Dr. Dan, both Emery and I are praying you'll become a creationist someday. But before that, if you become a theistic evolutionist, we'll be thrilled. So nothing personal, Dr. Dan. We love you. You're our favorite. We would love to have you as our biology teacher. But that's a standard viewpoint in evolutionary biology. So it's not that Dr. Dan is not up to date on the literature, but this is still kind of the evolutionary credo, that these are mistakes. And he cited it as evidence of evolution, and I knew he would. But let us first separate out common ancestry from evolution of complexity. Oh my goodness, speaking of which, appreciate it, Sal, but good luck. All right. So those of you who don't know, Dr. Dan is Creation Myths. So we're praying for you, and we love you, Dr. Dan.
Maybe you should let Dr. Dan come in here and let me go out. If he wants to, I don't know.
Well, we're gonna, Dr. Dan, that invitation, once we get to the technical section, we can do that, if you're game. Okay. we extended the invitation, and we could always talk again about the stuff I'm going to put on the table.
Okay.
Because actually, I always save the worst for last in YouTube, because if I start with the worst, save the best for last, I won't have an audience by the end. Okay. Oh my goodness, he was listening to this. So we do love you, Dr. Dan. All right, so now I set it up. So I'm not going to criticize common ancestry here. I am going to criticize that Ayala is saying this is so stupid, it's incompetent. So what happened? It didn't take but like 2 months. And Dr. Sanford said, just go look and see what you got out there in the peer reviewed. So I was Googling for a month. I prepared a report to him, and it ended up, it was just 7 pages. A month of work, I got 7 pages. I said, I said, I tried to be succinct, and it got incorporated into his book about page 300, Contested Bones. So even though it doesn't list me in the acknowledgement, he apologized to me. He said, Sal, I'm sorry, I should have put your name in there. But we have publications that are out there on university library shelves that have us as co-authors, so it's no problem. So if you, despite all the stuff you've heard from the other side, like from Erica, about Contested Bones being a terrible book, I said, Erica, if you could at least say something nice about the stuff I contributed, we can still be friends. I didn't really say that. She knows we're on good terms. So what was my counter? I'm going to summarize it here. While I'm bringing this up, if you all have any comments.
Go for it.
Because I have to actually dig this up. So if you have some thoughts, this is what's nice about having a co-host. We could talk about Dr. Dan. Oh, Brandon's here. Let's go, Brandon. Hey, nice to see you.
Oh my. Yeah. So, I mean, I appreciate that. You put a lot of work into this, and I'm really interested to see what you've got, because this is not an area I have researched extensively. Again, time, and because I'm currently researching for a graduate school project, Google Scholar has decided that I am a spam bot, and is now limiting my search my searches. So it'd be tough for me to find something with Scholar right now, but so just definitely something I'm interested in learning about.
Okay, I found my article. It is on Creation Evolution Headlines, and maybe I'll actually dump it in the chat. While I'm dumping into the chat, a response to Jan Waska. There was, on Modern Day Debate, a pair of identical twins. Identical. One of them became an atheist. One of them became a Christian. It was the Perry brothers.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's who that it was. Yeah.
Yep, the Perry brothers. So let me actually, since I wrote it, can you?
I'll read it.
Yeah, I dumped it. Okay, great. You're a great reader. You're faster than I am in reading. So thank you. I actually have a slight reading disability.
That's
so
right.
it's great. Praise the Lord, you're here, Emery.
Fine. All right, so this is fairly short.
So now this is 2018 after, this is already 2 years after. So even when I wrote this, it was antiquated. And I'm going to read later when we get to the technical section. When we get to the technical section, even more up-to-date stuff. So go ahead, Emery. Thank you.
Sure. So the title of the article is "Some, quote, junk DNA may act as computer memory." And starting with the article, Chris Roop co-authored the book Contested Bones with John Sanford to tell about the inadequate evidence for human evolution. The book is almost entirely about bones and the fossil record, but there are 3 pages in that book that refute claims by evolutionary biologists that the human genome is badly designed because of repetitive DNA elements known as ALUs. Some 10 to 11% of the human genome is composed of repeats of a specific 300 base pattern called an ALU. Evolutionists claim that this is bad design. Their reasoning goes something like this. You only need one copy of a phone book in a house, maybe a few at most, certainly not millions of copies. Therefore, the 1 million copies of ALUs in the human genome is worthless junk. It doesn't even code for anything. Therefore, ALUs are bad design. Since it's bad design, there is no reason to believe there is an intelligent designer. But I knew there was likely a skunk in this evolutionary reasoning, as I can usually smell it miles away. For example, if you had looked at this server farm, and there's an image there, and saw all the repeated copies of the computers in memory, would you conclude that it was bad design? It turns out that the ALU DNA, like identical copies of computers in a server farm, can have their memory reprogrammed on several levels. When ALUs are transcribed, they have editable sites that act somewhat like RAM, random access memory, or EPROM, erasable program memory. Roop's book quotes 2 papers in support of this idea. The first describes the adenosine to inosine, or A to I editing that goes on in ALUs. Quote, binary use of A or I in millions of sites in the neural cell transcriptome can be considered equivalent to the zeros and ones used for informational storage and processing by computers. It is tempting to speculate that the more abundant RNA editing found in the human brain may contribute to the more advanced human capabilities, such as memory, learning, and cognition. This suggestion is consistent with the hypothesis that the advantage of complex organisms lies in the development of a digital programming system based on non-coding RNA signaling. The combinatorial post-transcriptional RNA editing of non-coding sequences may therefore contribute to higher brain functions. Unquote. The second paper says, quote, there are over 100 million human ALU RNA editing sites in each cell, located in the majority of human genes. Unquote. I did a back-of-the-envelope calculation, and if each brain cell is 100 million such ALU binary bits, and if each brain has 100 billion cells, then that is about 10 to the 19 bits of memory. That is staggering, and that is consistent with the claim that the human brain has more connections than all the routers on the World Wide Web. Roop and Sanford try to argue we aren't evolved monkeys. In contrast, Ayala, who is bent on making monkeys out of everyone, said in 2010 when he criticized Stephen Meyer's signature in the cell, and this is what I just read. So I'll skip that.
Oh, go ahead.
You read it? Okay.
It's going to be great. Just to remind you where we were.
Okay. There are also lots and lots of DNA sequences that are nonsensical. For example, there are about 1 million virtually identical ALU sequences that are each 300 letters, nucleotides, long, and are spread throughout the genome. Think about it. There are in the human genome about 25,000 genes, but 1 million interspersed ALU sequences. 40 times more ALU sequences than genes. It is as if the editor of signature in the cell, which would have inserted between every 2 pages of Meyer's book 40 additional pages, each containing the same 300 letters. Likely, Meyer would not think of his editor as being intelligent. Would a function ever be found for these 1 million nearly identical ALU sequences? It seems most unlikely.
Ha ha
Yeah.
Go on, please.
Ayala's got a little bit of egg on his face with that claim.
The title of my talk, God is looking wiser, Ayala's looking stupider. Go on.
Yeah. Postscript. Well, hold on, hang on. I missed a sentence. Well, it seems Ayala, writing for Biologos, didn't make a monkey out of everyone after all, but at least he succeeded in making a monkey out of himself.
Okay, that's enough.
Sal, I didn't realize you had this much snark in you, man.
Oh yeah, okay. After I read that snark got into me, because he's just posing himself. I'm so smart, I wouldn't do things. That's so stupid. God has a sense of humor, you know?
Yeah.
Because they were saying this story for 20, 30 years. Okay, so that's kind of the snarky side. But on the scientific side, this is not helpful that they're saying this is useless. This is a distraction. It discouraged researchers from getting grants, from investigating this and trying to understand the human condition and maybe cure diseases. This is a good example of kind of this like non-design attitude hurting the advancement of medical science. And so, yeah, there was a lot of snark there. Yeah, I was channeling Emery Moyna even before I met you.
That's Starky even for me, Sal. You didn't even know me at that point, so I'm not letting you get away with that.
But now break it down for me, okay? I'm just going to repeat back what I was hearing from that, and you tell me if I'm getting it wrong, okay? So what I'm hearing is that there's all this, there's all these repeated things, and it looks like it doesn't have function, but actually what they're finding is that it kind of works like a rewritable thing that can be like copied, like, or like used for a purpose and then like reused again for later on or something like that. Like it's kind of like a blank, like I don't know.
You actually captured it well.
Okay.
So, do you remember the videos we did on DNA replication and those little machines that are a problem for evolution?
Yeah.
So that's how DNA is copied. But DNA can actually make, they use the DNA to make proteins. But in that step, they make these things called RNAs. So you have DNA, DNA makes RNAs, RNAs are used to make proteins. The RNAs, so Ayala is saying that's just a waste. It doesn't, it doesn't do anything. It just makes these copies and then the copies are thrown away. So you're making all these phone books and disposing of them. And why have all these phone books in there? Just bazillion copies. And so that's what he was saying. And so he said, it's unlike, are we going to find any use for are we going to find any function for these? I think it's unlikely. And I just said, ha, 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 and I'll tell you the ultimate irony, Emery, as he wrote that essay, that's when these experiments, these papers that I cited were being written. So I actually found them 6 years after they were written. So while Ayala was talking about how incompetent God was, yeah, the answer was right there.
Right there in his own technical literature.
Sal, how does this relate back to what Dr. Dan was saying? Because you cited something like TL or TE or something. He said
transposable elements.
Okay, so this is the same thing that Dr. Dan was
It's
citing.
one class. Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, in the fact it is one class of transposable elements. There are other kinds called lines and
signs.
Yeah, an ALU is a sign. Yeah, I'm sorry. There's so many, but basically, he said transposable elements are bad and they're just junk. I solved one part of the problem because the ALUs are a big chunk of that.
I'm going to take issue with that too because
I may have misquoted him. So let's be fair to Dr. Dan because.
Okay, yeah, but let's assuming he actually said that. Which if he didn't, I apologize, Dr. Dan.
Yeah, we apologize, Dr. Dan.
My special one of my things I read a lot about is polyploidy, and in the polyploid literature, transposable elements are involved in the epigenetics of the genome. Like it's involved in methylating and demethylating sites in order to allow the genome to function. So I don't think that you can make I don't think the argument that TEs are just pure selfish elements and pure junk is viable anymore.
Now, I will point out Ayala got one thing right. He said in the spontaneous abortions and stuff, and that it causes defects. I'm like, so these elements will copy in the genome. But if they end up in a bad place, it can really cause damage. And, and I said, Dr. Sanford, these are really damaging. If these things were inserted in the genome randomly, it'd kill us. There's no way that we had all this much ALU elements and we didn't die. I'm getting a little technical here. So back to Rebecca's question, what Dr. Dan was talking about. So about 50 to 75% of the genome, I think, in one study, this could be subject to change, are what they call repetitive elements. When they say repetitive elements, just copies of the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And some fraction, let's say maybe 30% of the human genome are these transposable elements. 11% of the genomes are ALUs. So the thing is, I haven't solved all the things that Dr. Dan would put on the table, but I helped. I haven't solved it anyway to begin with. It was these researchers.
Mhm.
I found answers. There's answers in the secular literature that account for 11% that used to be just written off. I mean, Ayala was really going after that because he said this is the worst example. He picked the ALU elements, and so did Dr. Sanford. So there's hope if we have shown that this is not bad design, but actually ingenious. It gives 10 to the 19th number of bits. I can't even, what's that, like a
lot.
sextillion? Yeah. That's a lot. And that's why they say the brain has more connections than the World Wide Web. And I'm like, yeah.
Now, why did Dr. Dan say good luck? Because he doesn't believe that you have the answer to this.
No. Because I said, Dr. Dan, we're praying for you that one day you'll be a young Earth creationist.
That's
That's what he's saying good luck about. Okay, I thought he was responding to what you. Okay,
I laughed.
I'm pretty sure that's what he was responding to. He said, good luck. Well, miracles happen, right? So,
Right.
So that no, I don't think he was taking issue with the scientific discussion.
Okay.
Here. I think he was just we're working on Dr. Dan here. So the where was I? So because the ALU elements now came from being like, being in the dog in the house to being an example of intelligent design. In fact, the paper I cited said this is what makes humans exceptional. It's something that makes them intelligent more than any other creature. And I was counting all the bits, 10 to the 19th bits. So something that was junk suddenly becomes like, that's what makes us exceptional. And it just in 10 years, it just, the viewpoint turned. So did that sort of help answer your question? It's implementing a computer system that we didn't even know existed. So we've described DNA as part of a computational system. There's another layer there. In fact, parts of the DNA themselves now are also, you have all these computers and subcomputers, you might say, like the ALU element system.
it's amazing.
We are fearfully and wonderfully made. So you Christians out there, the Psalms, it says, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And this is great. This is not just an anti-evolution argument, but we declare on this channel the works of God. And that's a comfort to us. So do you have any other thoughts before? Now we're getting warm. Now we're warmed up for the heavy stuff. And if you just want to lurk, you don't have to bail out totally. You can just lurk or shut your camera off or just say goodbye. But now Emery and I will
nerd out now. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being a part of this, Rebecca.
Yeah. Pleasure.
Have a great night.
Bye.
Have a good night. That was fun.
Yep, that was fun. That was fun, and I learned something because I didn't know that much about the ALU units. So I've now learned quite a bit, and it sparked me thinking too, which may result in a show on my channel about transposable elements. So that's a whole other thing. But anyway,
ALUs, I don't know how big. Okay, so it depends on how many what percentage of the human genome are transposable elements?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but if ALU are 10 to 11% of the whole human genome, like that, they're going to be a big chunk of the TE class, because you got to rule out the protein coding genes, you got to rule out the non-protein coding sections of the control sequence sections. So they're going to be a significant chunk of the TEs are going to be ALUs.
Yeah, I'll guess 30%. How about that?
That's probably a fair estimate, I would guess.
Yeah. So someone who know in the know, please weigh
Yeah,
in.
that's us spitballing here. We don't have that number in front of us. So if somebody knows the correct number,
Yeah,
feel
Dr. Dan actually would know.
yeah, he
So
probably would.
you'd probably put him to sleep. So that was, so what I read was just 2016 knowledge. And I said, I remember Dr. Sanford, and, he gave me my start in,
Oh, he's still awake.
Oh, he's listening. 45-ish retrotransposons, another little bit of DNA, about 8% ERVs if you include those. Okay, so 25%.
So that looks like that's like 53 total percent of what would be considered transposable elements, which is not small. Dr. Dan, since you're listening, do you happen to know the percentage of ALUs that are part of those transposable elements? Like what percent of those transposable elements will be ALUs? If you don't know the answer, that's fine. I just thought maybe since you're here and you happen to know this stuff, I'd ask.
Okay, so now I'm going to drop in the chat stuff. Hang on, I'm gonna let me see this. I actually have another. If you have some thoughts, because I need to bring something else up in the meantime.
Well, I just think that so far this has been helpful because, like, I actually bookmarked that article you wrote for CEH, because I think that there's some interesting stuff there, and I didn't know very much about ALUs at all. So I've now learned some stuff tonight. So I appreciate that. Thank you for letting me come on and talk. I've learned a few things. So that's been helpful.
Well, I'm glad. And it turns out no, I won't go there. Sorry, I have to watch what I say, because I was about to release some sensitive information, not meaning to.
You can tell me afterwards if you want to, Sal.
Yeah. But you're talking about me being snarky. Okay, there are classes of ALU elements that are called bonds. And so I said, the Flipons Flipoff Ayala.
Ouch. Ouch.
Okay, so in addition to what I said, we have now flip-on classes of ALU elements. And a lot of people don't know that Michael B. He was a pioneer of zDNA. I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, everyone knows him for intelligent design, but he was a postdoctoral student at the NIH under Gary Felsenfeld, very senior, respected scientist. And Michael B. He was among the founding fathers of the discovery of zDNA. So I would probably credit some Felsenfeld or someone else to be the head, but then Michael B. He came aboard just a little bit. Yes, thank you. Heartfelt thanks, Dr. Dan. And
Sandy. Sal, you're muted again.
Oh, sorry, I was just speechless, that's all. Oh, that was lost on me. Oh, Maddie ALU. It's a great prayer. And so all right, so bear in mind that there is this next article is going to use the word flip-on a lot. And so when it says flip-on, a flip-on is an ALU, Not all ALUs are flip-ons, okay? So if it's a flip-on, it's an ALU. But if it's an ALU, it's not necessarily a flip-on. So if you could, I'm going to share this on my primary computer and we could blow up here, but
Right.
I'll try anyway. And if you could read, now I'm sorry to have to ask you to edit out stuff as you
Okay.
read it. But given that Ayala just said this is stupid, evolution explains it as functionalist junk, the next two papers, the next two articles we read, they're going to say evolution explains this by natural selection and mutation, all this function. And so my point is, it's, you know, whatever it is, if it overturns the theory, evolution's still true, evolution's still true. And I'm just going to it kind of turns my stomach a little bit. It's like, that's away from what we're talking about in terms of what we actually find in the lab. So if we could, as much as to your discretion, and I may call it out to, you know, like say, skip that section. We'll just focus on what we've actually discovered in the lab in terms of operational science. And so you could also try to describe the diagram here. And that's the article there. So have at it, Emery.
All right. So the article is on a website called Lab Manager, published in 2019. Title is DNA is like everything else. It's not what you have, but how you use it. DNA sequences encode information in many different ways. Codons specify amino acids involved in making a protein. Other DNA sequences specify the start and stop signs for where an RNA begins and ends, or how the RNA transcript is spliced together to make different protein variations from a gene. This coding is static. It doesn't change. In contrast, other sequences called Flipons act dynamically to alter the readout of genes. Hello. Flip-ons are sequences that can switch between different DNA conformations, for example, from right-handed bDNA to left-handed zDNA, allowing a cell to modify the RNAs it is producing.
Okay, we could stop. Let's go to the diagram here.
Just hang on, let me digest that. Ayala says, oh yeah, ALUs they're junk, they don't do anything. And then we get just this casual sentence at the end of this. Well, they can switch between different DNA conformations and allow the cell to modify the RNAs it's producing. What?
Oh, yeah, that's why I want to quote Ayala. What did he say? Are we going to find functions for ALUs?
It seems unlikely.
Not likely.
Oh,
yeah.
I mean,
victory is sweet.
I mean, okay.
So let's go over the diagram here again. We might. I mean, I just want to look at it. So you see on the left there the bDNA conformation, and then the other one zDNA. So, and they had this delta E equals K delta I or something. That's showing a relationship of energy and information content. This is heavy stuff, guys. Yeah. This is really heavy stuff because it's going to refer to that equation. I mean, this is biophysics now. We're talking biophysics and information theory, and I've been really, let me just take this down just briefly, Emery. We'll get back to the reading. All right, I've been really telling ID proponents, unless you know what you're talking about, don't be using the information theory arguments or thermodynamics.
Yeah.
This is the exception. This is when it really matters. In biophysics, this is a use of genetics, genomics, biophysics, thermodynamics, and information theory to implement a system. This is the one time you have to use it, and it's thoroughly proper to use it. And this is not trivial stuff. So, going back to what Ayala said, are we going to find functions for this? Not likely. High five, guys. All right, we can go on.
All right. Flip-ons are an example of. Did I skip? I did skip a paragraph.
No, go ahead. You can reread it. I love hearing it again. We're going to.
No. I actually skipped a paragraph. I didn't reread. I was skipping a paragraph. Different information is read out of the genome depending on flip-on conformation.
Yeah, baby.
ALUs don't do anything. Okay.
ALUs don't do anything.
This is all casual too. They're acting like, oh yeah, we've known this for years. Flip-ons allow a cell to change its response dynamically to environmental challenges. For example,
Randy will love that one. Sorry.
I know he will. For example, although it's not epigenetic, so he may not like it. For example, flip-ons regulate interferon responses to viruses and in cancers. Families where an RNA editing enzyme called ADAR is unable to recognize a zDNA flip-on have uncontrolled interferon production called a type 1 interferonopathy.
Can I stop you here?
Sure. Yep.
So going back to 2016, I talked about A to I editing, adenine to inosine editing, and it's mediated by that ADAR enzyme. ADAR stands for adenosine deaminase acting on RNA. So when I was talking about those 10 to the 19th power bits, that ADAR enzyme is the enzyme that catalyzes the reaction that's flipping all those bits. And in my article that I gave, that report I gave to Dr. Sanford that ended up in Contested Bones, I said the evidence that this is important is when you knock out the ADAR enzyme, the creature dies or it goes insane. So A to I editing, that's strong indication that A to I editing is really important. So Jan Waska was asking about the epigenome and epigenetics. Those are modifications generally on the DNA, not quite, generally on the DNA, epigenetics.
Mm-hmm.
When we're modifying RNA, that's epitranscriptomics.
Mm-hmm.
Epitranscriptome. This is the epitrans, and this is a new project at the NIH, what they call the E4 epitranscriptome, enabling exploration of the eukaryotic epitranscriptome. They just abbreviated E4. And so now we're beginning to see how this A to I editing and all those, we talked about the RAM and the EEPROM. It's now actually physically affecting conformations. This is serious stuff, guys, man. This is like non-trivial. And that's why I'm just laughing. High five. Ayala says, are we going to find function for this? Not likely. Okay, go on.
Jeez Louise. In another example, oxidative stress causes base modifications that promote the zDNA flip-on conformation. In these instances, flip-ons act as DNA sensors. To activate protective pathways to repair and prevent damage to cells. ALUs don't do anything.
Yeah, ALUs don't do anything.
Yeah, totally. Oh, boy.
Oh, by the way, can I pause just a little bit? And so Ayala was saying, well, these can't do anything because when we have a retrotransposition of ALUs, look at all the damage it causes. You can also interpret that to say, if it's not in the right place, it's going to be killer. Now, This is starting to explain why there's a birth defect associated with retrotranspositions. And Dr. Sanford was really sharp. He said, come to think of it, the human genome couldn't have possibly tolerated the insertion of 1 million ALUs. If even a few are starting to cause all these birth defects, how could we have not died from this huge infusion of insertions? And many of them are primate specific. So in the evolution of primates, how could this have happened? And this is mechanistically explaining this is bad because if you start with a bDNA and it starts shifting to zDNA when it's not supposed to, it was even showing this interferonopathy. If it's not synchronized, it's bad. You get all these conditions. So Ayala was right to say that when you have a transposition, it causes bad things. In most of the papers up until 2010, when you look at ALU function, they would actually say, okay, when an ALU transposes, it causes birth defects, and that's more dysfunction. But most of the papers, when we were looking at the medical side, was when we have a retrotransposition of ALUs, they're bad. But now this is showing why it's bad. This is also showing simultaneously why it's bad. So if you have any thoughts, otherwise, feel free to continue.
I am still digesting all of this and going, wow.
Wow.
I've taken a couple of graduate level genetics classes. We learned none of this.
I know. This is cutting edge, baby.
Technically, it's 3 years old, so it's not cutting edge anymore. Not in genetics, anyway. But but I mean, geez, Louise, this stuff is groundbreaking stuff, and nobody hears about it.
Well, you heard it on this channel. That's why we're doing it.
Yeah. Sal, I've kind of been prodding you to, put some papers in the, professional journals. This might be a good one. Just saying. Anyway, moving on to the next paragraph.
Oh, thanks for taking care of the trawl, whoever did that. The bot. Thank you.
Yeah. They're out in force. Anyway, Flip-ons are an example of an instructive genetic code, one that directs the compilation of RNA transcripts from the genome. It works in a similar fashion to the way computer codes combine different elements to build a program. By changing conformation, Flip-ons alter editing and splicing of RNA transcripts, allowing the creation of many different outcomes from the same DNA building blocks. The change in programming is dynamic. While the information in DNA is static, cells find many different ways to use that coding to adapt.
Yay! Okay, you could stop here because you could see what the next sentence is.
Yeah, I can see what the next sentence.
Yeah, that's worthless.
At this point, yes. Holy jump.
Are we having fun now, brother?
Like this is close to nerd heaven here. Like
nerd heaven.
Like what? What? Well, I've taken 2 graduate level genetics classes. Why did I never hear about this stuff? Like
I could tell you, I mean, they want to, the teachers want to just kind of just repeat the class from like before. It's easier for them. Stay traditional.
Yeah. That and the textbooks we use probably didn't have them in it either. That's to be fair, but
well, I'll just mention one reason I'm acquainted with this, honestly. Many of you know Cy Gart.
Yes, I know him.
And he was a professor at my school. And that was the school. It's the best unaccredited graduate school on the planet because it's hosted at the NIH. You can get credits at Johns Hopkins if you're in a PhD program. I mean, no other school I know of that's unaccredited, Johns Hopkins will actually grant you credits if you go to that graduate school. And so you get a lot of professors that are at the cutting edge teaching these classes, and they share stuff like this with their students. And that's where I got some cool stuff. So that's why Dr. Sanford sent me there instead of Dinosaur Adventureland. Sorry to take a swipe, but he wanted me to learn from evolutionists and from the cutting edge. So that's my best answer. And I just want to brag on that school because they did so much for me. And they helped me get acquainted with this. And because I was in that community, I was able to do what Dr. Sanford asked me to do. He said, Sal, go fix the problem. He didn't say go fix the problem. He said, go look into that, Sal. Mm-hmm. But I knew that's what he was asking. Yeah. And God's timing was just right there. Look at all that's happening. And I actually am working on a project with him. And I said, this motivated me as I just came across this stuff Friday. Just yesterday is when I came across it. And I said, I want to send this off to Dr. Sanford, but I said, before I do that, he has an assignment for me that I need to complete first. So that motivated, I started we're writing a paper on nylon eating bacteria evolution, which seems so, it pales in comparison to this stuff. So, but thank you for your encouragement to write papers on this. Yep. This is just too cool.
Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, I would be tempted to write the papers myself, except you're way ahead of me. So I'd let you. You've already done the research, so I'll let you write them.
Well, now we can go. Now we're saving. Okay, this I would say is the high point of the whole talk so far. It's downhill from here, guys, honestly, because I want to follow up with one paper that goes a little bit more into the details, and then we'll call it a night. We're not going to have to get really, really, really deep into it. But just to give an idea of the complexity of what they had to find to make this all work, I would like to touch upon it. And I linked to the paper from the Royal Society in the video description. I'm probably going to have to cut you off a lot, Emery, when you're reading this, because every other half paragraph they'll say, "Oh, look what natural selection and mutation can do," and it's just sickening, because I said that's kind of not the way Ayala characterized it. So,
not to be, I don't want to be, I do not want to be rude to Dr. Dan or to any other evolutionists out here, but that's kind of how evolutionary dogma works. It's very malleable. Evolution did this, and when the opposite is found to be the case, so evolution did that. I don't have any, I don't want to be mean, but that's how it tends to operate.
well, it tends to sound that way to my ears. And it's like, if it could account for every outcome, it's not really falsifiable.
Right.
And it's like, what are you saying except evolution did it? It doesn't seem that far removed from creationists saying God did it.
Right. Except it's couched in much more complex scientific language.
Yeah. So, and really that's why, to me, I mean, Andrew Cumming I don't think he appreciated me saying, I think what so many parts of evolutionary theory are statements of faith.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and I wasn't trying to, well, maybe, I really was not trying to be snarky to him, but I said, okay, yeah, I just put this before you, and you're saying that you believed it evolved, but you can't explain how. And I said, that's a statement of faith. You could say it's a scientific explanation, but it is not an empirically proven fact. And you don't have any theoretical reasons it should actually evolve, because I showed all the problems. And before I had a chance to really have a conversation with Andrew Cumming, John Maddox is there, and you know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Boy, all the pummeling and bullying. I'm like, okay, John, all right. But so now we have the other article. And this actually, John Maddox would love this. And I'm going to show the article here. Let's see if I could bring up the. By the way, I'm very flattered you like my article from Creation Evolution Headlines. Mm-hmm. That's run by David Coppage, son of James Coppage, who wrote a book that also helped me to start believing in creationism in the early 80s. And then 20 years later, I nearly had a loss of faith. I went back to that book. And David Coppage runs the website Creation Evolution Headlines. He was fired from the Jet Propulsion Lab for running that blog. And other things as far as his creationism. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I'm familiar with David Coppage. I've never met him, but I'm familiar with his work.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and we might have to blast through this, but at least
yeah, this thing ain't short.
So get to the point. It's like, no, let me set up the drama, then you'll appreciate the point. That was the whole reason I was drawing this out.
Yeah, Sal, this thing is not short. Like, we're gonna have to seriously blast.
Yeah, I'll help you cut through it. Okay, so
okay, yeah, I mean it's 21 pages.
Dr. Dan, PDF. I'm sorry, go on.
It's 21 pages of PDF. So
we're not going to go there. Well, okay, it's going to get cut down to at least 10.
Okay.
And we're going to skip a lot, at least 10, because half of it was just pouring out praise on evolutionary theory, okay, and we can skip that.
Okay.
But as Dr. Dan taught me, he said, go to the abstract,
mm-hmm,
and we'll at least, okay, read the title and the abstract.
Right, I can do that. That's easy enough. This article written by Alan Hebert. I don't know how he pronounced his name, but anyway, that's his name. It's in the Royal Society Open Science. So again, note, not a junk journal. ALU non-bDNA conformations, Flip-ons, binary codes, and evolution. Abstract. ALUs contribute to genetic diversity by altering DNA's linear sequence through retrotransposition, recombination, and repair. ALUs also have the potential to form alternative non-bDNA conformations such as zDNA, triplexes, and quadruplexes that alter the readout of information from the genome. I suggest here that these structures enable the rapid reprogramming of cellular pathways to offset DNA damage and regulate inflammation. The experimental data supporting this form of genetic encoding is presented. ALU sequence motifs that form non-bDNA conformations under physiological conditions are called flip-ons. Flip-ons are binary switches. They are dissipative structures that trade energy for information.
Can we stop here?
Sure.
Trade energy for information. And so when you read that article from Lab Manager, it probably was referring to an article like this. So that's why I wanted to give a more, so I gave, you read earlier the popular version, and I wanted to give the viewers here,
Techie version.
Right. So by the way, once it starts to talk about evolution, we'll just stop there and then we'll move.
Right. By effectively targeting cellular machines to activate genes, Flip-ons expand the repertoire of RNAs compiled from a gene. Their action greatly increases the informational capacity of linearly encoded genomes.
Oh! Oh! I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, whew, that's an admission and a half.
Can't help but spiking the ball and celebrating in the end zone.
Yep. By efficiently targeting cellular, I just read that sentence. Their action greatly increases. Read that. Flip-ons are programmable by epigenetic modification, synchronizing cellular events by altering both chromatin state and nucleosome phasing.
Can I stop? I'm
Sure.
sorry. It's an epigenetic. It is both epigenetic and epitranscriptomic. It modifies at the DNA level and also at the RNA transcript level. This is unbelievable. It's polyconstrained to accept modifications in the DNA methylation sites, and then it will accept modifications in the adenine sites in the RNA transcript. So it's polyconstrained for the CPGs and the A's. The CPGs in the DNA state, the A's in the RNA state. This is unbelievable. Go on, thank you.
Different classes of flip-on exist. Z flip-ons are based on zDNA and modify the transcript compiled from a gene. T flip-ons are based on triplexes and localize non-coding RNAs that direct the assembly of cellular machines.
Yeah, baby.
I'm going to read that sentence again. T flip-ons are based on triplexes and localize non-coding RNAs that direct the assembly of cellular machines. Okay. G flip-ons are based on G quadruplexes and sense DNA damage, then trigger the appropriate protective responses. ALUs don't do anything, huh?
Yeah.
Flip-on conformation is dynamic, changing with context. When frozen in one state, flip-ons often cause disease.
Yes. One thing Ayala got right.
The propagation of flip-ons throughout the genome by ALU. Okay, there we go. There's the evolution.
Yeah, you could skip all that.
I'm going to pause. I'm going to pause here and just look at the last sentence. When frozen in one state, flip-ons often cause disease. I have to wonder now if there were a bunch of ALU/flip-ons in the original genome, and the ones that we see today that are disease-causing are later evolutionary downgrades, if you will.
I think that would be a great inference. So not only did Dr. Sanford's assignment to me show the functionality of ALUs, it also shows that a mechanism for genetic entropy. Sadly, this is really sad. I mean, you could really cause a lot of damage with ALU elements. So if these things are retrotransposing and they're uncontrolled, if they keep leaking out, the end is in sight, sad to say.
Yeah.
So this contributed to genetic entropy theory, and Dr. Sanford wrote the book Genetic Entropy in 2005. None of what we've just put on the table, obviously this is long after that book, but I think the obvious is going to start to come out.
Yeah.
Wow. So that was the abstract.
Yeah, that was the abstract, guys.
Okay, the reason it was important that I at least show the paper, and I'm glad it's 21 pages, you'll see the experimental evidence, because up until this time, John Maddock, who was saying junk DNA, that's biggest mistake in the history of molecular biology, we really didn't have a lot of laboratory evidence. So people like Ayala, Avise, and the rest of the evolutionary community were just looking at the top of the world saying, in fact, there was a publication by John Avise in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, PNAS. And he did a whole takedown or attempted takedown of intelligent design. He cited ALUs. Is there going to be a retraction? I doubt it. No. But they were sitting on top of the world. So up until about 2010, we were really, the ID community, the pro-functional DNA community. So there's elements who were not ID friendly at all, but they're medical researchers, and they say, we got to study this. It's the sentiment at the NIH was echoed by one of my professors. I was asking him about these, about certain repetitive elements. He said, well, I don't know, but if it's there for a reason. If it's there for a reason. And when I shared that on some, yes, unfortunate acronym, when I shared that on the internet with Joe Felsenstein, Larry Moran, a real, especially Larry Moran, really anti-ID guy, he said, how we failed the next generation, that people have that attitude that if it's there, it's for a reason.
No, you failed them by telling them that if it's there, it doesn't have a reason.
That's right.
And just for the record, this Haybird article, it's 21 pages, but it has 237 separate references.
Okay. So I'm saying this because up until things like this, they'll say, well, what's your evidence? What's your proof? And I still hear creationists, and, I said, you got to be a little bit careful. Dr. Dan is right. And Dr. Grauer were criticizing the ENCODE claims of 80% functionality, and it was due to, we're detecting RNA transcripts or whatever, and differential expression levels. And they were arguing, well, this could be just noise. And I said, caution, creationists, don't be too quick. I said, I was on Dr. Dan's show. I said, Dr. Dan, I know some on my side have been really quick to the gun. I would say, I personally think it's functional, but we have to wait for experimental evidence. And we can go one piece of classed DNA at a time. ALUs is one of them. And I said, I'm going to wait until we get more experimental data. It's coming in. And so the naive view is like, oh, this is so identical. How can it be useful? It's just a repeat. And I kept saying, Dr. Dan, this could have biophysical properties. That was my guess. That was my answer to him. And he said, it could probably, since it's repeated, it could tolerate changes. And it's like, don't be so fast to say that. And a paper like this is giving experimental evidence that the genome could be very, very sensitive. No, correct that. It could be slightly sensitive to changes in individual nucleotides. But genetic entropy says when you have collectively more and more, it's just like the tread's wearing out on a tire. It's going to start to add up. So if you start degrading these repetitive elements in the ALUs, given all this experimental evidence, this is a target for slow deterioration genetic entropy, exactly as in the genetic entropy hypothesis. This is genomic decay. It's just inviting it. I mean, 10% of 3 gigabases is 300 million bases. No way natural selection could arrest that decay. So, and Dr. Sanford and I would often laugh. You would get genetic entropy even with 1% function. The ALUs take this to 11%. The coding regions to 2%. We're way over that. And it was really funny. Dr. Grauer, when Dr. Sanford was talking at the NIH, he said, Dr. Grauer said, if ENCODE is right, then evolution is wrong, because every human female needs to make 10 to the 35th power kids to stop genetic deterioration, or our phrase is genetic entropy. And the funny thing is, Dr. Grauer provided what he thought was the right number. It's only 44,000 kids per female. So
that number totally works.
that number totally
somebody go out of their way to tell, young ladies before they get married, oh yeah, you got to have 44,000 kids just to keep humanity alive. See how well that goes over.
Yeah. All right. So we'll just read a little bit of the technical stuff, and as we'll have over time, we might read sections of this, but I think people are getting kind of the gist of where we are headed. So why don't I just, and Dr. Dan said, the next thing I would do when I'm doing a journal club, and oops, let me stop sharing there. It's this one. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Emery. I clicked the wrong button. Emery, you're still there?
I'm still here. Yep.
Okay. So I can't expand the, I'm having a problem expanding the graphic there.
There we go. It expanded.
All right. So you heard the word triplex. I think the triplex is a combination of RNA wrapping around the DNA. This is like a non-trivial thing. You have RNA, DNA triplex, and then so that's in the kind of the panel, the first panel on the left, and then you have the Z-DNA conformation, and then you have the parallel G4 quadruplex. So these are the various states of DNA with the RNA, and it's saying that the parallel G4 quadruplex is important formation for DNA damage repair. And then on the RNA DNA triplex is for RNA regulation or something. And then you have the Z-DNA. I mean, this is like non-trivial. And again, credit to Michael Behe. Everyone knows him for intelligent design, but he made a really big contribution in the discovery, in the early discoveries of Z-DNA. And everyone's forgotten that because it's been overshadowed by his role in the ID community. But that's a lifetime achievement right there.
Yeah.
So Michael Behe, hats off to you. It's just, that's a real scientist there to have made a contribution like that. So there we have what we call the logos, the consensus sequences. Like you can see, it says the triplex. It has lots of these A's in it, the adenines. And that's the part of the ALU that will help form the triplex. And then the other part will form the other things, like I would presume the Z-DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other part. So this is very well, dare I say, designed.
Just maybe.
Yeah, just maybe. So biophysical processes. So you can see there the 4 different conformations of DNA and RNA. RNA the RNA DNA triplex, zDNA, parallel G4 quadruplex. And then last but not least, bDNA.
Yeah, which is the more normal strand.
Let's see. And oh boy, they really get into this a little bit more.
This is a Nerds Go Clubbing paper, Sal.
Yeah, definitely. But I wanted to show you could. This goes that B panel there. That's showing that ALU triplex.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the. Oh my goodness! And then it has a link RNA there into the mix with the ALU triplex. I'm nerding out. This is nerd heaven. And then they have this enhancer complex, which is also a regulatory feature. I mean, this is like non-trivial. And yeah. So let's see if we have anything else. Okay, maybe we'll just randomly pick. I'll randomly pick one paragraph out of this. We'll read the conclusion and move on and close the stream. So if we read, it'd be a nerd thing to actually even just read the figure, legend, and caption, just to explain everything.
For which figure, Sal?
Huh?
For which figure?
Oh, well, forget it, because we're not going to go there.
Okay.
Don't have. I'm just. Okay, why don't we read this section on 3? It's going to be technical, and then we'll just go to the conclusion, and then we're done.
Section number 3, you said?
Yeah. What does ALU RNA do?
Okay, here we go. ALU RNAs have roles that vary by how they are transcribed. A minority of ALUs, 1.5%, undergo transcription by RNA polymerase III using the same A and B boxes as 7SL RNA, figure 1. Many RP3 transcripts, which is RNA polymerase III transcripts, are expressed in a tissue-specific manner. An analysis of 27 cell lines, 16 primary cell types, and 45 tissues using a recently developed high-stringency method for identifying RP3 transcripts revealed that their cell-specific expression is predicted by chromatin modification, not by differences in ALU sequence.
Oh!
Transcription is highest for ALU elements that lie within 10,000 bases of genes transcribed by RP2. The RP2 and RP3 transcription units cooperatively induce local chromosomal loop formation. Some RP3 units produce an enhancer RNA, eRNA, that guides the assembly of transcription factories.
I didn't even know about eRNA. Okay, I learned something.
Yeah, I didn't know about that either, so that's new. Other RP3 transcripts act in trans to inhibit RP2 with the ALU right arm binding to the RP2 cleft. ALU self-cleavage relieves this inhibition during heat shock. The ALU-Y ribozyme cut site is at position 51 of the left arm. Cleavage is enhanced by the enhancer of ZEST2 polycomb repressive complex 2 subunit, EZH2. And by the way, if you don't know what that is, neither do I.
I actually do.
You do? Okay, so that's good.
I've made presentations on the EZH2 and the polycomb repression complex. This is unbelievably complex. Praise the Lord.
ALUs can inhibit translation by inhibiting ribosome assembly. In addition, they induce phosphorylation of PKR, double-stranded RNA, dsRNA, activate protein kinase encoded by EIF2AK2 to inhibit translation and initiate stress granule formation.
That's enough. Hallelujah.
Yeah, that sentence, that paragraph. Woo! Suffice to say, it's complicated.
Now, this is, I mean, guys, I respect geneticists, but this is, to me, is just like the coolest stuff as an engineer and a guy interested in biophysics. This is just mind-blowing. I mean, I'm not really into phylogenies when you could just see how all this connects. Just the amount of nano engineering here, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I wanted you guys to get a taste for, even if you didn't understand everything that was read, I hope you can sense the genius of the designer, because everything that they were describing is God had to account for each and every piece of this. And the complexity cannot evolve by random mutation.
Wow, I'm just blown away just by that paragraph. I'm like, wow.
Yeah. This is why sometimes I do like getting into the nuts and bolts rather than the surface arguments, because when you get down to this level, it starts to become really hard to believe. When I get told it's random mutation and natural selection, I'm just like, no, this is way too much. And this is just, as you can guess, this is the tip of the iceberg. This is just the tip of the iceberg. It's not going to end. The complexity we're going to discover here. And RNAs are a very complicated and fragile molecule.
Yeah.
I did early on when I was working for Dr. Sanford, I was getting all these papers in computer publications saying RNA is the ideal molecule to implement a nanomolecular computer. And this is why. DNA is just too stable, which is what you want. You want the genome to be stable so that inheritance, you don't want anything to, you want a very non-fragile molecule to hold important information. But you need a more fragile molecule to do computation. RNA is the ideal molecule. So what's going on here is all this three-dimensional computation, unlike anything we know how to do. And you got a feel for that. So they mentioned when Emery read the section on the polycomb repression complex in EZH2, I've covered that. But let me briefly say why that's important. And we were showing pictures of link RNAs, another class of quote unquote junk DNA. The example that Carl Zimmer showed, and this was discovered, it was probably the greatest report in the history of Cell, the journal Cell. It was by, I'm having a Joe Biden moment. I can't remember the guy's name right now. But the discoverer of the hot air link RNA, the hot air link RNA is transcribed from chromosome 12. It jumps on a molecular machine called SUSY and travels all the way to chromosome 2. How it navigates there without any active propulsion is amazing. It then goes to the Hox gene cluster and assembles a whole, it triggers the assembly of this polycomb repression complex, which is a bunch of proteins. It grabs a specific region in the DNA, gets to a histone in the chromatin that the DNA is wound around, will target histone 3 specifically. It'll go specifically to one amino acid, the 27th amino acid, and methylate it. It's going to go through all that. And that's what the polycomb repression complex does. What does that result in? The quality of skin on your eyes is different from the quality of skin at the soles of your feet. That one change in an epigenetic mark on histone 3, position 27. And the reason I know that was my first class on chromatin modifications and the roles of, this was part of me trying to do my work for Dr. Sanford, and the timing was great. So just think of what has to happen, the difference in the quality of the skin, see how soft it is at your eyelids versus the sole of your feet. One amino acid is flipped, histone 3 in the Hox cluster. It's done by it's initiated by an RNA transcript that begins from chromosome 12, goes to chromosome 2. We'll find the Hox cluster in all those millions of base pairs. will go to the right histone to the right amino acid. You talk about point-to-point navigation, and now we're finding the ALUs are mixed into all this too. So, yeah.
Woo.
Are we praise the Lord here? Amen.
Yes.
Hallelujah for His great works.
Hallelujah. Wow.
So, and then the paper goes into the different class of flip-ons that we got in the other one. I'm glad we had that summary paper from Lab Manager.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about the G flip-ons and the Z flip-ons and the T flip-ons, and I say the flip-ons are flipping off Ayala. I'm sorry, I was channeling you there, Emery. So I tell you what, why don't I, just to give the, we read that article, that one paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna just to give you guys the idea of the complexity, I'm gonna scroll down to the conclusion, and I'm just gonna let you see it scroll down, and then you can read the conclusions, and just flipping off Ayala with every paragraph here. And so I'm just kind of savoring this. I know it's gloating, it's unseemly, but you know, it's been 2 decades. I mean, I was there 20 years ago and I nearly lost my faith. And these guys were piling on and saying, it's junk, it's junk, it's junk. Evolution is true. And they were using this. So,
Sorry, Ayala.
yeah. So how about we read the summary here?
Sure. Sure.
It's only like we'll let the evolution junk. You can just edit. You guys listening, you can just edit that out of your head.
Yeah. There's a sentence in here in particular. I was skimming the summary earlier. There's a sentence in here in particular that's really interesting. But I'll get to that in a minute. ALUs have a direct impact on evolution through the DNA damage they cause and the chromosomal rearrangements they provoke. ALUs also impact evolution by the non-B DNA structures they encode. The sequences capable of adopting these alternative conformations are called flip-ons. That's redundant.
Flip-ons.
Yeah, redundant. Flip-ons are programmable binary switches whose conformation can be set independently of each other. They act in combination to greatly increase the coding capacity of linearly encoded genomes. Flip-ons act in cis through locally produced zDNA and in trans through triplexes formed from RNAs transcribed elsewhere. Transcribed elsewhere. That's interesting.
Well, yes, that was that. Well, that hot air thing was an example there from chromosome 12 to 2. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, talk about the amount of foresight needed for that. Oh my. Praise the Lord.
Oh, and reminder that DNA, when it's in storage, isn't nicely organized. But anyway, moving on. Along with the G4Q that sends DNA damage, they alter the transcripts compiled. They act by changing chromatin state and phasing nucleosomes. The complex machines they assemble alter cell-specific outcomes. The cellular memories they create refashion future responses. And the Mendelian diseases they cause are instances when these processes either freeze or fail. So basically, when ALUs stop working, bad things happen. But when they're working, good things happen.
Amen.
That sounds an awful lot like an argument for evolutionary junk DNA, doesn't it?
Yep.
If you wanted to make a junk DNA argument out of this, it would have to be the other way around. But, of course, they can't actually argue that because there is junk DNA. Is the idea of the genome being largely junk is, well, it's a junk idea. By their very nature, invasive ALU units cannot help what they do. They spread by inserting themselves into active genes throughout the genome. Does he not see the contradiction between what he just wrote and the sentence he's now typing?
Right. And you know what he did do, however, not unwittingly? That's genetic entropy.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus said the world is passing away. There you go, right there.
Mm-hmm. And then let's unpack it. I'm going to read this paragraph and then we're going to unpack some assumptions here. The non-BDNA structures they form provide an instructive code for compiling novel transcripts from wherever they land. By carelessly generating phenotypic diversity, ALUs unintentionally accelerate evolution of many things new and unexpected. Hogwash.
Ow! Ow!
Hogwash. Hogwash.
Hogwash!
This only works. This only works. Here's the mental gymnastics he has to do to write this paragraph. For the first sentence, he assumes that all ALUs spread, that the reason we have so many ALUs is because you started with one or two and they've spread through the genome throughout evolutionary time. That's his assumption in the first two sentences. Right? They spread by inserting themselves into active genes throughout the genome. The problem with that is when you do that, you break things. Right? But he's assuming that that is beneficial to evolution. He says so in the final paragraph, that they accelerate evolution by breaking stuff. And then here's his second assumption. In this next sentence, the non-DNA structures they form provide an instructive coding for compiling novel transcripts from wherever they land. Well, that only works if you assume that A, they didn't break something when they went in, and B, that evolution must be true, and therefore these things must be helping evolution, or natural selection would be getting rid of them. This guy is performing like Olympic level mental gymnastics in this final paragraph.
Agreed. That's what, the only way I could read this is to just kind of edit it out mentally, because it was disgusting. And I said, what he's doing is he's taking great experimental work that's showing the glory of the designer, and then he's going to put an evolutionary spin on it.
Yep.
He's kind of like the Jen Psaki of the current administration. Sorry.
We'll circle back to that. We'll circle back to that. Sorry.
It was sickening, but God bless him for compiling all those experimental references.
Yep. If I ever write an article on ALUs, I'm using this as a reference point.
You know what this sounds like? It's like when Francis Crick, biologists have to continually remind themselves that what they're looking at is not designed, but
rather evolved.
And yeah, it's this seems like almost kind of self-therapy for him. Maybe. He has all this. He has to persuade himself. Oh, this is evolved, and it accelerates evolution. Look how glorious evolution is, because it's staring him right in the face. And I said, why don't you read? I was thinking to myself, why don't you read Ayala?
Yeah, I mean, he probably did. To be very honest with you, he probably did, but he just doesn't remember it because this was years later. I mean, with the evidence that we've looked at today, I'm surprised an ALU didn't slap him in the face for writing that, because, like, I get a little bit of personification here, but we're closing the stream down, so I can be a little bit funny. If I was an ALU and I'm sitting there in his genome, listening to him, watching him write this, I want to jump out of the genome, jump up to his face, and give him a good smack. Like,
yep.
What are you doing?
What are you doing? And I got to say, okay, for the young Earth creationists there, this is a teachable moment. And this is one that John Sanford and myself had to go through. What do you do when an evolutionist gives you an argument that looks insurmountable, and you know that they're making a good point? That's why it was important we read that Ayala article, because thankfully I read this, I think, after I did my ALU research, because if I had read that and I didn't have all the data that God provided, it would have shaken me up. And I can understand now what Dr. Sanford was going through. And when he was on James Tour's show, and James Tour asked him about, why are you a young Earth creationist? And he said, it's because I committed my life to God to honor his word, and it means everything. And that was a bold, that was faith of a child, that Jesus said, you enter the kingdom of heaven like a child. And that means you don't have the answers to everything, but you're trusting your parents. You're trusting your dad, your heavenly Father. And that takes a lot of courage on a certain level.
Yeah.
Because you're facing things that look insurmountable. And that you read that, God bless that he brings people like Rebecca. It's like, oh, that's not a problem for me. I don't understand. And I'm like, actually, we need people like that, because they kind of keep the faith going. When you have people like me, it's like, no, I can't go on. This is too much. I can't overcome it, but just pray for me. And so I saw some of the counters to the ALU arguments before all this stuff was coming out. They're saying, well, look, some of these end up being part of proteins. And it's like, and this paper did highlight correctly, those are usually bad proteins. Dysfunctional. This is the first time I saw it. And so Jonathan McClatchy on the ID website, Evolution News and Views, he actually cited this, and Larry Moran pounced all over him. He said, yeah, it might be there, but that's only one fraction of them. And then now in this paper, it correctly highlights that these are usually damaging the protein that it's in there. So in the eagerness to win the debate, they ended up making matters worse for themselves as they cite bad examples and ones that weren't accurate. But then if you just wait on the Lord, sometimes he'll bring you the answer. And so I had the privilege of watching all this unfold. So if you wonder why I'm just gloating at this point, because I was there when the other side was beating us down really hard on this. Anyone in academia that were creationist, ID friendly, and understood the details of what we were talking about knew that Ayala had a very good case at the time. He had a very good, like you said, Emery, it was actually, some of it was really well conceived, that essay.
Yeah. The whole there can't be a God because design issue is not a good argument. There's this much, there's these shared errors. That would be a better argument. I don't think it's a good argument necessarily, because I think the more we discover, the less it's going to look like shared errors.
Like case in point, the ALUs.
Yes, precisely.
And I don't know if Erica Gutzik-Gibbon is still using this as an argument for shared errors. So this is one way to alleviate it. I still have some problems with pseudogenes, but after this ALU experience, it's like God has an answer. Because this is the word, Dr. Sanford himself said this is the worst one for him. And God provided. God honored his faithfulness. So God bless you, Dr. Sanford. I'll give you the closing thoughts. I hope you've been overwhelmed and overjoyed by this NERDS Go Clubbing. It's not our usual boring, sleepy. This was pretty exciting for me personally.
Yep. Yeah, I learned quite a bit in this one, and I feel like I got quite a lot out of this. I feel like I really got a lot out of this. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I'd like to thank all the audience, and most of all, I'd like to give thanks and honor and glory to the Creator for his wisdom and majesty, which he has shown us this evening. Even though it's been delivered by pagans to us through the secular world, as it says in Romans, we know about God's eternal power and his divine nature through the things that have been made so that they are without excuse. And I feel that scripture, we have seen it fulfilled on some level this evening. So thank you. Take care and God bless you. I'll meet you backstage, Emery.
Right.
Have a good evening, everyone. Good night.